Judge Mia Johnson sat poised behind the bench, the courtroom's heavy silence hanging like a cloud. She was more than just a judge. She was a symbol of resilience. A black woman known for her fierce dedication to fairness and unwavering courage in the face of injustice. Today, she faced a case that carried weight far beyond the walls of this courthouse. Across from her sat Officer David Miller, a white cop whose name had become synonymous with unchecked power and whispered scandals. His record was stained. Multiple accusations of brutality, racial discrimination, and abuse of authority clung to him like a dark shadow. Yet, time and again, David walked free, shielded by a network of influence embedded deep within the system. Evidence disappeared, witnesses changed stories, and investigations stalled. The law had become a veil, thin and fragile, barely hiding the machinery that protected him. The tension in the room was palpable. David's smug smile betrayed his confidence. A man who believed himself untouchable, who saw this courtroom not as a place of justice but a stage where he controlled the script. But Mia Johnson was no ordinary judge. Her eyes, sharp and steady, reflected a lifetime of battles fought and won, and those still raging as the trial began. Every word spoken, every piece of evidence laid bare, told a story not just of one officer's violence, but of a system failing to protect the vulnerable. It was a story of power and privilege clashing with truth and justice. And in the center of it all stood Mia, ready to challenge the unspoken rules and fight for what was right, no matter the cost. The question loomed. Could justice survive when the scales were tipped for so long? The answer would come in blood, courage, and unyielding will. The heavy oak doors swung open, and David Miller strode into the courtroom with a swagger that seemed to mock the very institution meant to hold him accountable. His crisp white shirt, sleeves casually rolled up, and the faint curl of a smirk on his lips spoke volumes. He didn't just enter a room. He invaded it, carrying the arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. Judge Mia Johnson's gaze sharpened as he took his seat. There was no apology, no flicker of remorse. Instead, Miller leaned back with a deliberate nonchalance, his eyes scanning the courtroom like a king surveying his domain. His presence was a provocation, a calculated display of contempt for the law, for the judge, and for every voice that dared to challenge him. The evidence against him was undeniable. Videos from a gas station camera showed Miller striking an unarmed black teenager without warning. A brutal, reckless act caught in cold detail. Witnesses spoke with trembling voices about his history. The nights of excessive force, the racial slurs, the whispered threats that silenced victims. Yet, with every new revelation, Miller's response was a dismissive chuckle, a sneer that cut through the solemnity of the court like a blade. He whispered to his attorney, then locked eyes with Mia, his look heavy with unspoken challenge. "She thinks she can judge me," his body language seemed to say. "A black woman daring to sit above me? This trial's a joke." The courtroom's air thickened with unease. Jurors exchanged uneasy glances. The press leaned forward, sensing the storm beneath the surface. Every piece of testimony was met with Miller's cold indifference. He didn't just reject the accusations. He belittled them, turning serious claims of abuse into a spectacle of defiance, as one witness described the moment Miller threw the first punch at the young man. Miller's lips curled into a faint smile, as if recalling a private joke no one else understood. He interrupted the solemn flow of testimony with low, sarcastic laughter that sent a chill through the room. A bailiff called for order, but the disruption lingered, a shadow casting doubt on the court's control. Judge Mia's calm facade masked a fire burning beneath. She knew the game Miller played, the calculated disrespect meant to intimidate, to weaken the court's resolve. But she would not be shaken. Her voice cut through the murmur, clear and steady, questioning Miller's twisted justification. Do you truly believe striking an unarmed person without cause is self-defense? She asked. Her words icy yet precise. Miller's response was a mixture of disdain and veiled menace. I don't need a lesson in law from you, ma'am, he said, emphasizing the last word with a sarcasm that dripped like poison. The courtroom felt the weight of his words. A cocktail of racism and sexism cloaked in mock politeness. The jurors' faces tightened. Even some spectators gasped. But Mia held her ground, refusing to let his tactics distract from the truth. She pressed further, asking why, despite multiple complaints and clear evidence, Miller had never faced real consequences. The silence that followed was deafening. Miller's eyes flickered with something darker, a flicker of anger barely contained beneath his smirk. His clenched jaw and twitching fingers betrayed the storm beneath the surface. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move in this dangerous dance, and no one knew it yet. But this was the moment the trial crossed from legal battle to raw, human conflict. The clash wasn't just about facts and law anymore. It was about power, identity, and the very soul of justice. As the tension spiraled, the stage was set for a confrontation that would shock the court and challenge the limits of courage. The courtroom buzzed with tension, every eye glued to the unfolding drama. Judge Mia Johnson sat steady, her voice unwavering as she grilled David Miller. But beneath the calm surface, a storm was gathering. A tempest fueled by years of unchecked arrogance and simmering rage. Suddenly, without warning, Miller's smug mask cracked. His fingers curled into fists, jaw clenched so tight it seemed to grind bone against bone. The laughter died. The courtroom air thickened, charged with the electricity of impending violence and one fluid motion. Miller pushed back his chair with a thunderous scrape, the sound snapping like a whip through the courtroom. Gasps erupted as he surged forward, eyes wild and fixed on Mia. No one was prepared. The bailiffs froze, stunned by the suddenness. Miller closed the distance in a heartbeat. His fist swung with brutal force, connecting squarely with Mia's cheek. The crack echoed like a gunshot. Blood burst free, a vivid scarlet line tracing a cruel path down her face, dripping onto the polished wood of the bench. A shocked silence fell. Then chaos erupted. Reporters shouted, jurors gasped, and lawyers scrambled to their feet. A female juror's scream pierced the clamor, tears streaming as she stumbled back. Bailiffs lunged, but Miller thrashed wildly, his rage unleashed, cursing and shouting venomous words that filled the room with a raw, savage fury. She deserved it, he bellowed. She's not my judge. This land is ours. The law belongs to men like me. His voice cracked with animalistic rage, no longer arrogant, but wild and desperate. Amid the pandemonium, Mia Johnson did something no one expected. She did not fall. One hand gripped the edge of the bench, steadying her trembling body. Her eyes closed briefly, pain flashing across her features, but her spine remained unbowed. Slowly, she opened her eyes, not with fear, not with anger, but with a terrifying calm that pierced the uproar like a blade. With deliberate strength, she pushed herself upright. Blood stained her robe, her hair was disheveled, and her cheek throbbed with the brutal impact. Yet her posture was unyielding, her presence commanding. She was no longer just a judge. She was a living symbol of justice refusing to be broken. The courtroom held its breath. Officers pinned Miller to the floor, restraining his flailing limbs. But all eyes were on Mia. No one dared speak as she took a slow, steady breath, then fixed her gaze on the defendant. "I didn't think you held the law in such contempt." Her voice rang out, clear and resolute, slicing through the chaos like a gavel strike. The room froze. One officer glanced at another, a flicker of hesitation passing between them, but none dared interrupt. The power in Mia's words was undeniable. It was a command and a rebuke wrapped in quiet authority. The silence stretched, heavy and profound. This was more than an assault, it was a challenge to the very foundation of justice. And Mia Johnson had answered without raising her voice, without crying out, without collapsing. She stood bloodied but unbowed. The images of that moment rippled instantly beyond the courtroom's walls. Cameras captured the stark contrast. The blood dripping down Mia's face and the unwavering strength in her eyes. A courtroom once filled with fear and tension now held witness to courage that transcended pain. News anchors struggled for words, social media erupted, and across the nation, people stopped to watch. Here was a woman who had been struck down but refused to fall. She had taken the blows meant to silence truth, and spoken louder than any verdict. In that instant, Mia became more than a judge. She was the pulse of justice itself, raw, real, and relentless. A beacon for those who had been silenced too long. As the chaos slowly subsided, the question lingered like smoke in the air. How long could a system built on power and privilege withstand the force of a single unyielding woman? The answer, for now, was clear. Not today. David Miller was swiftly restrained, his furious thrashing quelled by the combined effort of several officers. His shouts echoed through the courtroom as he was handcuffed and led away, the weight of the moment sinking in. For a brief, blazing instant, it seemed justice might finally take its course. But the glare of hope quickly dimmed beneath the cold shadow of the system. Days turned into weeks, and the trial stalled. Documents mysteriously vanished. Witnesses, once eager to speak, found their voices silenced by unseen pressures. Meetings were canceled, evidence delayed, and legal motions quietly dismissed. It was as if an invisible wall had risen between Mia Johnson and the truth she fought so fiercely to reveal. Behind closed doors, high-ranking officials whispered in hushed tones. Powerful figures within law enforcement and the judiciary moved swiftly to protect their own. Their hands extended like roots, spreading through every branch of the system, choking the life out of accountability. Mia's frustration grew with each passing day, but her resolve hardened. She began to dig deeper, pulling on threads most feared to touch. What she uncovered was chilling. A tightly woven network shielding David Miller, shielding the system's darkest secrets from the light. Emails exchanged in secret, calls routed through back channels, promises made to keep scandals buried and reputations untarnished. The very fabric of justice was frayed by those sworn to uphold it. With each revelation, the weight on Mia's shoulders grew heavier. The fight was no longer just about one man or even one courtroom. It was a battle against decades of silence and complicity. Late one night, alone in her office, Mia stared at the files spread across her desk, witness statements, internal memos, covert recordings. The faces of victims, their stories etched in ink and pain, stared back at her. Tears welled in her eyes, not from defeat, but from the crushing injustice endured by those who never had a voice. Her heart ached for them. For the young man beaten at a gas station, for the mother who cried out for her son's safety, for the countless others swallowed by a system that turned its back. But Mia knew she couldn't falter. She wiped her tears away and clenched her fists. The cost was high. Threats shadowed her steps. Her family watched nervously from the sidelines, and trust became a rare commodity. Yet, her spirit burned brighter than ever. Every stone she overturned revealed another layer of decay. The path to justice was treacherous, lined with fear, deception, and the cold calculus of power. But she carried a torch, not just for herself, but for every soul left shattered in the system's wake. And though the system fought to break her, Mia stood tall, a living testament to courage. In her eyes, the fight was not over. It was only beginning. Because justice, no matter how deeply buried, will always find a way to rise. The courtroom lights seemed dimmer these days, the air thicker with whispered doubts and hidden agendas. But Judge Mia Johnson refused to let the shadows win. Every bruise on her face, every sleepless night, only fueled her relentless spirit. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for all the silenced, the forgotten, the ignored, the oppressed. With quiet authority, Mia began peeling back the layers of deception surrounding David Miller. Her courtroom transformed into a battlefield of truth, each session a calculated strike against the fortress of corruption. She summoned witnesses long too afraid to speak, their hands trembling but voices steady as they recounted stories of abuse, cover-ups, and threats. Their testimonies painted a harrowing picture, one not of isolated incidents, but a systemic culture that enabled men like David to wield unchecked power. Emails surfaced, revealing not just tacit approval but active orchestration by those at the highest levels. Names that had once commanded respect now appeared as complicit architects of silence. Contracts rewritten, complaints shelved, evidence altered. All meticulously designed to protect a status quo built on fear and privilege. Mia's eyes blazed as she presented the damning evidence. The courtroom, once buzzing with skepticism, grew eerily silent. Even David's defense faltered, scrambling to counter truths too glaring to deny. But the surprises didn't stop there. Buried deep within an unmarked file, Mia uncovered something that sent a chill through her. A direct connection between David Miller and a cold, calculated network manipulating not just police conduct, but judicial decisions. Documents revealed that for years, this shadow network had influenced appointments, suppressed investigations, and dictated outcomes. Judges were pressured, prosecutors coerced, and truth twisted into a weapon against justice itself. Mia's hands shook as she held the evidence, but her voice never wavered. This was bigger than any single case. It was an unmasking of a broken system, one that had thrived in darkness, but was now exposed under her unyielding gaze. The courtroom erupted with a mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment, social media ignited, and public outcry swelled beyond anything the city had seen. Yet, through it all, Mia remained calm, a pillar of strength amidst the storm. She knew the risks. Friends had distanced themselves, threats lingered in the shadows, and every step forward was met with resistance. But she had made a choice, to be the voice for those silenced and the force that refused to be broken. Behind the scenes, allies emerged. Courageous souls within the system who shared her vision, who believed that justice was not a privilege but a right. Together, they strategized, planned, and pushed to dismantle the protective web that had long shielded the guilty. Mia's courtroom became a symbol, a beacon of hope and a battleground for change. Each day, more victims found the courage to stand, knowing that their stories mattered, and that someone was finally listening. In a moment that stunned even her closest supporters, Mia called for a special hearing, one that would bring to light the entire network of corruption, naming names, revealing secrets, and demanding accountability. The city held its breath. Would the system crumble, or would it fight back harder than ever? Judge Mia Johnson wasn't just waiting for answers. She was making sure the world saw them, raw and unfiltered. Because some battles aren't won in silence. They're won in the unbreakable will to confront the truth, no matter the cost, and Mia was ready to pay that price. The moment the footage of David Miller's punch landed on screens, a wildfire of outrage ignited across the nation. The bloodied face of Judge Mia Johnson was no longer just a courtroom image. It became a stark emblem of a justice system under siege. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #JusticeForMia and #BreakTheSilence trended within minutes, sweeping across platforms with relentless fury. The public, long numbed by whispers of corruption and injustice, suddenly found a rallying cry they could not ignore. News outlets scrambled to cover the scandal from every angle, the relentless cycle of replays forcing millions to confront the raw, unfiltered truth. Protests erupted outside courthouses, city halls, and police stations nationwide. Diverse crowds, young and old, from all walks of life, marched together, their voices rising in unison demanding accountability, transparency, and reform. The air crackled with an urgent mix of anger, hope, and fear. For many, this was the moment the illusion shattered. Critics of the justice system seized the moment, denouncing decades of impunity with blistering editorials and fierce debates. Analysts dissected leaked documents revealing the vast, shadowy network shielding officers like Miller, exposing how deep the rot ran. What was once hidden in hushed corridors and sealed files now blazed in glaring headlines. But the backlash wasn't limited to outrage. It stirred a complex anxiety. Questions raced through minds everywhere. How many more David Millers were out there, protected by invisible hands? How many cases had been silenced or swept under the rug? How deep did this corruption go, and could it ever truly be dismantled? In homes, offices, and classrooms, conversations erupted. Families grappled with the uneasy realization that justice was not blind, it was manipulated. Communities once resigned to silence found courage to share their own stories, flooding hotlines and support groups. The incident transcended the courtroom. It became a national reckoning. Political leaders found themselves cornered, forced to respond as pressure mounted from constituents demanding swift action. Legislative proposals for police reform, judicial oversight, and transparency were thrust into the spotlight. But beneath the promises, the fear lingered. Would systemic change survive the entrenched resistance from powerful interests? Mia's name became synonymous with courage. Portraits of her standing bloodied but unbowed circulated widely, fueling a movement driven by a desire for justice that felt both personal and universal. Activists harnessed the momentum, organizing town halls, workshops, and campaigns to educate and mobilize. Yet, in the midst of this powerful wave, threats and intimidation surfaced. Mia's allies faced harassment. Whistleblowers were targeted. The same forces desperate to maintain control struck back fiercely, reminding everyone that the fight would be brutal. The anxiety was palpable, a tug of war between hope for change and the cold reality of entrenched power. But with every tweet shared, every sign raised, every voice lifted in protest, the system's veneer cracked further. Mia herself became a reluctant symbol, not just of resilience, but of the immense cost of standing for truth. Interviews, public appearances, and speeches filled her days. She spoke not just as a judge, but as a witness to the systemic failures and as a beacon urging the country to confront its uncomfortable truths. In classrooms, young people debated justice and power. In communities, dialogues about race, privilege, and accountability deepened. The incident sparked a cultural shift, forcing institutions to reckon with long-ignored realities. But beneath the fervor, an uneasy question lingered. Would this moment lead to lasting reform or fade as another headline in a cycle of outrage? The world watched, breath held, waiting to see if justice could finally break free from the shadows. And in every corner, the silent promise echoed loud. Change had begun, and there was no turning back. As the glare of public attention intensified, so too did the shadows creeping into Judge Mia Johnson's life. The moment her courage broke the silence, unseen eyes began to follow her every step. Surveillance cameras outside her home suddenly seemed less routine, their lenses cold and watchful like sentinels guarding secrets not meant to see the light. Strange cars appeared in her neighborhood, idling for hours, their drivers' faces obscured. Whispers of warning rippled through her circle of allies. Mia's phone buzzed incessantly with anonymous calls. Silence on the other end, except for faint static that sent chills down her spine. Emails arrived, dark and cryptic, promising consequences if she continued her fight. The messages were careful not to reveal their senders, but their threats were unmistakable. Step back or pay the price. Her team was not spared. Investigative reporters she trusted found their files mysteriously deleted. Legal aides discovered their home networks hacked and personal data compromised. The courthouse's IT systems suffered unexplained outages during critical moments. It was no longer a courtroom battle, it had become a war on every front. But the most harrowing blows were personal. One evening, Mia returned home to find her car vandalized. Windows smashed, tires slashed, and a threatening note left on the windshield. Justice is a dangerous game. You've been warned. Inside her house, she found signs of intrusion. Drawers left open, papers scattered, as if someone wanted to remind her that no place was truly safe. Despite the mounting pressure, Mia refused to waver. Each threat hardened her resolve, fueling a fire deeper than fear. She strengthened her security, hiring discreet protection not just for herself but for her family. She kept her daughter's school and daily routine secret, wary of those who would use innocence as leverage. Her nights were restless, punctuated by every creak and shadow. Yet, every morning, Mia rose with the same determined calm, stepping into the courtroom as if it were a fortress against the dark. She knew the dangers were real, but so was the duty that called her. Allies rallied around her, forming a shield of solidarity. Community activists organized watch groups. Legal teams worked overtime to counteract the disruptions. But even within her closest circles, whispers of fear surfaced. Some begged her to reconsider, warned of consequences too great to bear. Mia's eyes held the weight of that choice. Justice was no longer an abstract ideal. It was a battlefield strewn with risks. But she carried the faces of those silenced by the system, the forgotten, the broken, the brave who never got to speak. They were the reason she stood firm. In private moments, the toll pressed down. Late-night calls with her daughter were filled with reassurances. She struggled to believe herself. Her mind raced with questions. How much was too much? How to balance the scales between the fight for truth and the safety of those she loved. Yet even as the threats closed in like a tightening noose, Mia's voice grew stronger. Public speeches, interviews, and court sessions became platforms not just for law but for courage. She spoke of fear not as weakness, but as a call to action. An urgent plea for society to stand united against those who wield power through intimidation. The world watched, torn between awe and anxiety. Could one woman withstand a storm built by the very system meant to protect her? Could justice survive when its defenders faced such relentless assault? And deep inside, Mia knew the truth. This was no longer just her battle. It was a test for every person who believed in fairness, transparency, and the courage to confront darkness, even when it lurked within their own walls. The threats were real. The danger was near. But so was the unyielding light of a justice that refused to be silenced as the trial advanced. The courtroom transformed into a stage for far more than just one man's fate. David Miller's individual misdeeds, brutal and unforgivable as they were, quickly became the visible thread unraveling a much larger, tangled web of corruption. Witness after witness stepped forward, each one peeling back layers of a systemic cover-up so deeply rooted it seemed impenetrable. Until now, survivors of Miller's violence shared raw, personal testimonies, their voices trembling but resolute. Each story was a window into a broken system designed to protect the powerful and silence the vulnerable. Former officers spoke out under oath, revealing pressure to alter reports and dismiss complaints. Investigators described how crucial evidence was routinely lost or ignored. Prosecutors confessed to internal directives prioritizing political stability over justice. Judge Mia Johnson listened carefully, her eyes steady and unwavering, as the truth spilled out in the light of day. This was no longer a trial about one rogue cop. It was a reckoning for an entire institution built on fear, favoritism, and fractured principles. The courtroom buzzed with tension but also with hope. Hope that justice, though long delayed, was finally taking its rightful course. With each witness, the scale of accountability expanded. The names of high-ranking officials, once shielded by anonymity and power, emerged in testimonies and leaked emails. The public learned how layers of protection allowed Miller to roam unchecked for years, harming countless lives. The systemic rot was undeniable, and the demand for reform grew louder. Yet amid the heaviness of these revelations, a profound lesson took shape, one not just about injustice, but about courage and perseverance. Judge Mia's steadfast resolve inspired not only the courtroom but the wider community. People across the nation began to see the law not as a distant, cold system, but as a living, breathing institution capable of change when those within it dare to fight for truth. This trial became a beacon, reminding us all that exposing injustice requires relentless determination and collective courage. It showed that even the most entrenched systems can be challenged when voices join together and refuse to be silenced. For those watching this story unfold, it is a call to awareness and action. Justice is not an abstract ideal but a shared responsibility, one that demands vigilance, integrity, and empathy from every citizen. If this story moves you, if you believe in the power of truth and the necessity of accountability, subscribe to our channel. Stay informed, stay engaged, and join a community committed to shining light on the dark corners of injustice. Together, we can learn, grow, and help build a future where no one is above the law and justice truly belongs to all.